Black Swan has been amazing in Honkai Star Rail so far, and rather than using a full game tier list to talk about how good she is, today I decided that I'm going to rank every single character that focuses on damage over time in Honkai Star Rail as of the current version of 2.0. So before I get into my actual rankings, I first want to go over the three main criteria that I use to rank the characters on this list. So firstly, I'm only considering characters that have damage over time as a main mechanic of their kit. So this is going to disqualify characters like Serval and Hook that are able to apply dots, but they're not really like as focused on them. They have other sort of aspects that their kits are more focused on. The second criteria I have was that I wanted to judge each of these characters based on their consistency in performing throughout the game in multiple situations. So, if one character is really good in one situation, but is kind of average in others, they probably won't do as well compared to a character that can perform solid in a bunch of situations, but doesn't really have that one situation that makes them, amazing. And then lastly, my third kind of criteria, but also just a disclaimer as well about the thoughts in this list. It's entirely going to be from my thoughts and experiences. And those are purely from a free-to-play perspective, since I do have a free-to-play, kind of mindset with this because I am free-to-play. So when it comes to investments like Eidolons and signature light cones, all that kind of stuff, not really gonna focus on any 5-star signature light cones since I don't have any experience with them. And then for Eidolons, I am only going to talk about 4-star character Eidolon benefits if I do even bring them up, just because a lot of people who are free to play, it's not very likely that they're going to have Eidolons into a 5-star, especially since only a small handful of limited 5-star characters have reran, and the 2 5-stars on this list are limited ones, one of which, as we all know, just came out. So definitely do keep that in mind as well. But with that out of the way, let's get into my rankings of the top DoT characters in the game. So at number 5, which is the bottom of our list here, we have Luka. Now, I know Luka is the DoT character that I have the least experience with of the 5. I did make sure to do my research as well, and I do want to let y'all know, even though Luka is at the bottom of the list here, he's not bad by any means. I do think that the only thing keeping Luka below all the other DoT characters is how insanely different his performance is in certain situations. So Luka's best situation is going to be against enemies that are weak to the physical element, and pairing his bleed DoT, which is the strongest DoT in the game, especially for break effect, with a really good break effect build for Luka, he can do some insane damage when the enemy has a physical weakness. And even in my own testing, when figuring out my rankings for this video, I used a very low investment Luka. I had some decent relics on him, not even on the DoT set, and an okay amount of break effect, and he was able to hit over 100k still on a weakness break, which is insanely strong. But if you're in a situation with him where the enemy is not weak to the physical element, Luka ends up losing a lot of the benefits from running him, which makes his performance fall off a lot, because if Luka's not able to break the enemy, you're not going to be getting all the crazy damage that a lot of people see from Luka when they use him. So because of him being not as consistent over many situations in the game, I do think that he is overall the lowest ranking DoT character, but of course, as I said, that still doesn't make him bad by any means. He is just more situational and niche compared to the other ones on the list. So at number 4, now we have Guinaifen, and for a while leading up to 2.0, I actually preferred using Guinaifen on my DoT teams over Sampo when paired with Kafka. Now, of course, I switched them out depending on the situation, but Guinaifen does have a lot of value. So outside of her burn application through her basic attack and skill, she does also have 3 really powerful parts of her kit that make her excel as a DoT character. So the first one is that her ultimate can detonate her burn DoT, which is some extra damage as well, so think of detonation similar to what Kafka does, except for Guinaifen is just for her own burn DoT. So it is some extra damage as well. The second thing that Guinaifen has that's really powerful is her Fire Kiss effect, which has a chance to apply a stack for each time the enemy gets afflicted with a burn DoT, and each stack of Fire Kiss that they have is going to increase the amount of damage they take overall for 3 turns. And Right now, this only stacks up to 3 times, but if you have her at E6, you'll be able to stack up to 4 times. So it's a pretty solid damage increase overall, which it is just damage in general. It's not just damage from the burn dot. So this is going to improve not only Guinaifen's personal damage, but also going to improve the damage of your entire dot comp. And also, you know, if you want to run her on a different kind of comp as well. And then lastly, if you have Guinaifen at E1, which if you're someone who's running dot characters, this is pretty likely considering she's on Black Swan's banner right now, and as I'm making this video with the current Hanru's Prison Break event, you can get a free copy of Guinaifen as well. Her E1 effect gives her skill a chance to lower the enemy's effect res for 2 turns, which is really going to be helpful to make sure that you're getting your dots on the enemy, and overall just making that a lot more consistent, and that just is going to lead to some more damage. So when it comes to the negatives of Guinaifen, she does have that similar kind of weakness to Luka and other dot characters, where if they're not fighting an enemy that has their weakness, then Guinaifen's not going to perform as well. But for comparing Guinaifen to Luka, who's right below her, it doesn't feel as bad for Guinaifen, just because she is able not only with the Fire Kiss to improve the team's overall damage, but she can still be useful in that kind of way, plus adding the burn dot as well. And she's also not really, at least in my experience, you can let me know in the comments if you've ran like a break effect kind of Guinaifen, but I haven't really seen that be too much of a widespread kind of build. So Guinaifen does have her kind of value as a sub DPS, really just amplifying the other dot characters in your team. So I do think as long as the rest of the team is able to deal with the weakness break just fine, I think Guinaifen is still going to be a very solid option, which puts her here at number 4 on the list. Next up at number 3, we have Sampo. And before 2.0, as I said with Guinaifen, I did have them at pretty similar levels in terms of how good they were, and I did think that Sampo was very slightly worse, but it was kind of back and forth in my head for a while. But again, these two are very situational. But yeah, starting out with Sampo here, I do think that he has some really strong abilities for dot comps, especially with his Wind Shear, because Wind Shear is the one dot of the 4 main dots that can stack multiple times on the enemy. So for Sampo, all of his attacks have a base chance to inflict 1 stack of Wind Shear on the enemies, which is really good, especially with his skill, because you're gonna be hitting multiple enemies with that. So if you do have a fight with like 3, 4, 5 enemies, you can get Wind Shear all across the field, which is really solid. Then also Sampo's ultimate has a chance to increase the amount of damage taken by all enemies from all dots for 2 turns. And that's gonna be really strong, because any other dots you have, if you're running him with Kafka, Guinaifen, Black Swan, like literally anyone, you're gonna make any dot that they have even stronger. So Sampo definitely does benefit dot teams from there. And the other thing I really want to bring up about Sampo is that one of the main reasons that he is where he is in this tier, on this ranking, is because a lot of people thought that, Black Swan is win nihility, she's gonna replace Sampo, and while she is better than Sampo in pretty much every situation, I'm pretty sure, running them together isn't a bad option either. When you're fighting a character that's fighting an enemy that's weak to wind, those two together can basically just shred the enemy's shield, which is absolutely ridiculous. And it is something that I've kind of tested out. Hopefully we'll get some more situations where I can test it out, even though my Sampo is still not the best built overall. So now to transition to his shortcomings and weaknesses, it's very similar to Guinaifen and Luka, where if they're not weak to wind, he's not going to have as much value. But I do think that comparing the Fire Kiss and Sampo's ultimate there, I do think Sampo's ultimate ends up having slightly more value, not just because of the extra damage, because Fire Kiss does give extra damage as well on the burn dot procs, but also for Sampo's ult, you can pair that up with the Fermata Light Cone, which increases the amount of damage from enemies that have wind shear, or the amount of damage dealt to enemies that have wind shear or shock on them. And because you're running Sampo, you're always going to have wind shear on them. So that is ultimately going to put Sampo above Guinaifen for me on this list here. So before I reveal my number 2 pick, I think that between the last 2 characters, which I'm sure we all know who they are, this was an insanely close comparison because these 2 characters provide an amazing amount of value. And I definitely had to, you know, figure out through like different scenarios, like if they're together, if they're separate, what characters they're with, how much, if one of them can have more value than the other just overall and with the most consistency. So after considering all this, I am giving the number 2 slot on my top DoT characters list to Black Swan. And there's 2 main reasons I'm putting her here at number 2. So my first reason for this is that her kit has much more significant benefits for DoT comps compared to the characters below her, even when she's at E0. If you're, you know, I said I wasn't going to comment on this too much, but if you are a like light spender or even like a whale, of course her Eidolons are going to make her even more valuable. And her Arcana provides some amazing damage, especially if you get 7 or more stacks to be able to ignore a percentage of the defense of the enemy, as well as have Arcana be an AoE kind of, well not AoE, adjacent targeting kind of effect for that as well. Then the second reason that she's going to be at number 2 here is because when it comes to her performance with Kafka, which of course we'll get into Kafka when we get into number 1, I do think she performs significantly better with Kafka just because of their synergy. And I think that character's performance with Kafka in a DoT comp is a reasonable criteria to think about when it comes to their consistency, because if you're running DoT comps, you're running Kafka. I feel like not many people are going to be running DoT comp. I mean, with Black Swan now, it's a bit, you know, it's a bit more likely that people can do that. But I do think the most consistent DoT comps are going to still be with Kafka, especially for people that might not have went for Black Swan, but they do have Kafka. So I do think overall that that's going to be really helpful there. But yeah, but since Black Swan can still stand on her own, if you're going against an enemy that isn't weak to lightning for Kafka, but they are weak to, let's say, physical, for example, you can run Luka, and that will definitely still be very helpful for Black Swan. But yeah, overall, I think that her power, just as a kind of like, I'm going to call her a DoT DPS because her damage is absolutely insane for like her personal damage, even because I think a lot of the DoT characters, they might have some solid, like, you know, team-wide damage, being able to buff that, but Black Swan's personal damage, plus also being able to benefit from the team's damage as well, definitely secures her a spot at number 2 on this list. And finally, at number 1, to absolutely no one's surprise, we have Kafka. So ever since Kafka came out in 1.2, she has been the foundation, the bread and butter of every single DoT comp because of her unique ability on her skill to detonate every single DoT on the enemy, which is going to further increase the team's overall damage. And now that with Black Swan, we know that Kafka's skill also applies to Arcana, which will give Black Swan even more stacks of Arcana, which is crazy. So yeah, pairing this with her own shock as well will take, basically it just took DoT damage from just some kind of thing that we had in the game that was like okay prior to 1.2 to actually being a viable strat to build your teams around. And my other reason for Kafka being at the top here is that compared to most of the other DoT characters, when it comes to getting their builds right and making sure that they can perform at their best, I do also think that she's the easiest to invest in compared to everyone else on this list. Because for those characters, you are going to need a good amount of effect hit rate, especially for Black Swan if you want to get to her maximum potential. Like I'm pretty sure for Sampo, Guinaifen, and Luka, you want to be around like 60% effect hit rate. Whereas for Black Swan, you want to be at 120%, even though like around 100% is still fine for her. For Kafka, you really only need like 30%, which means that you can focus a lot more of your relic stats on attack percent, which is overall going to make Kafka's personal damage go up as well, which will be very nice, especially if you are really focusing on detonating all those DoTs, which you should be doing if you're running a DoT comp. And also, you know, with the extra not focusing on effect hit rate, you can focus more on, you know, speed and break effect as well if you want a more like break effect heavy Kafka. So she is going to end up performing a lot better with a bit less investment in her own build there. So with all that in mind, I can confidently say that Kafka is the best DoT character as of version 2.0. So now the last thing I want to keep you all, I want you all to keep in mind here is that regardless of where I ranked a character on the list, like for example for Luka, I have him at the bottom of the list. As I said previously, I do think that all 5 of these characters are extremely strong, and depending on the situation, they could be absolute powerhouses. So if you guys have any thoughts on the rankings I did here, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to have some discussions, especially with people who might be coming from other perspectives as well. If you're like a light spender, if you like really invested heavily in one of the characters that I haven't, like Guinaifen or Luka, I'd definitely love to hear that as well. Or, you know, if you guys have any other like, you know, categories or like paths that you guys want me to rank, I could also, you know, see this comments on there, and I love to see what you guys are looking for. But yeah, with that, everyone, I want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, definitely be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell. But with that, I will see you all next time.